Out there in the vast, cold abyss beyond the fleeting radiance of the night garden, a grotesque form drifted slowly on the powerful underwater currents. Its eerie shape was so vast and inconceivable that Sunny failed to fathom what he was looking at for the longest time. Move forward slowly. The night garden was not pushed by the wind or by oars, relying on unknown magic to sail instead. So, it did not matter whether it was gliding across the waves or moving beneath them. Jet could control its speed and direction all the same. She did as Sunny told, changing the angle of their descent. Before, the night garden had been simply plummeting down through the dark abyss, but now, it pushed forward through the crushing mass of water. Jet drew a deep breath as her gaze grew distant. Sunny raised an eyebrow. What? She remained silent for a moment, then shook her head. No, nothing. It just feels different when we move underwater. The night garden has to push through its mass, after all. So, there is a different relation between the effort I need to exert and the speed it can reach. There's a learning curve. Jet sighed. It feels nice and liberating to glide across the sea. But here, it's a bit of a chore. Like running with weights tied to your ankles. Sunny gave her an odd look. Did you often run with weights tied to your ankles? Jet stared back. You didn't? Sunny scratched the back of his head. When I ran, it was usually from something trying to eat me. Why would I go around weighing myself down? A corner of her mouth curved upward. You make a good point. They fell silent as the night garden slowly drew closer to Old Tom's remains. Sunny had to admit that he had misjudged the distance between them and the grotesque corpse. There was no curvature to the depths of the storm sea, so there was no horizon, and there were no landscape features to serve as reference points either, only the boundless darkness. Old Tom turned out to be much, much larger than Sunny had thought after beholding it for the first time. What does that thing look like? By then, Jet could see one of the tentacles trailing behind the sinking corpse, but the main body of the horror of the depths was still hidden in the darkness. Sunny did not hurry with the answer, though, trying to understand what Old Tom had been, rather, himself. It took him until the pain of his flaw became almost unbearable to finally make sense of the horrid visage. It's an oyster, I guess. Sunny said that, but he was not sure that he was correct. There was indeed a hard shell akin to that of a bivalve mollusk somewhere in the terrible mess of formless flesh and tentacles that spilled from its open frame. The shell itself was the size of an island, covered by a forest of eerie black growths. Beneath them, however, it glistened with dull gold, as if cast entirely from precious metal. The gargantuan shell was dwarfed by the lifeless mass of flesh and colossal tentacles spilling out of its mouth, though. It was impossible to imagine that all that revolting flesh could have fit inside the vast confines of the golden shell, and there were other things drifting in the water beside it, as well, things that must have escaped from within Old Tom after its violent death. There were titanic bones that must have belonged to abominable leviathans, empty shells of indestructible chitin that had once sheltered horrid monsters, rotten carcasses of countless ancient ships, mangled masses of rusted metal, vast shards of something that looked like diamond glass. Old Tom must have gorged itself on all kinds of things over the eons. All of it trailed behind the slowly sinking corpse like the tail of an horrid comet, dwarfing it in size. Follow current S on novelfire.net. It was obvious that all these remains had been expelled from within the hideous shell, and yet Sunny could not quite understand how. Their volume was far greater than the gargantuan shell. Eventually, he narrowed his eyes. I think that good old Tom wielded dimensional powers. There must have been a pocket dimension hidden inside its shell, a dark and harrowing hell that nothing could escape after being swallowed by it. Only it was destroyed when Old Tom died, so now its body, as well as everything it had failed to digest over thousands of years, is spilling out. If Old Tom had been able to fold space, Sunny could better understand how its tentacles were so impossibly long, as well. The night garden was close enough to the colossal shell and the vile mass of formless flesh protruding from within it for Jet to catch a glimpse of the trail of debris left in its wake, too. She moved the ship to the side, deftly avoiding a gargantuan tentacle, and then asked in a somber tone, what killed it, though? Sunny studied the unimaginable mess of Old Tom's flesh for a while, and then said quietly, "Both halves of its shell are shattered, with jagged holes at the center." Judging by the positioning and the size of the holes, as well as the pattern of cracks spreading from them. He fell silent for a moment, and then added with a hint of unease in his voice, "Old Tom was killed in a single strike. Something unimaginably powerful pierced its shell through and destroyed whatever it was that had kept it alive." Jet shivered. What the hell could have killed that thing in one blow? Sunny did not answer immediately. Eventually, however, he was forced to, "I don't know. I don't think I could have, though." They both remained quiet after that as the night garden slowly sailed past the corpse of the eerie horror of the depths and moved deeper into the abyssal darkness of the storm sea. Just as they were passing the terrible mass of flesh, Jet suddenly asked, "Do you know what I'm thinking about?" Sunny raised an eyebrow. "No." She hesitated for a moment, then smiled faintly. "I was thinking, if Old Tom is a sort of oyster. Do you think there's a pearl somewhere inside its shell? What would that pearl be?" Sunny stared at her for a while, then shook his head energetically and looked away. "I don't know. And I am sure as hell not climbing inside to find out." Laughing quietly, Jet led the night garden deeper into the abyss. Her laughter, however, did not mask a somber wariness that she felt. Sunny was wary, as well. Although Sunny did not want to admit it, Old Tom's death had disturbed him quite a bit. It was not only because of the fact how vast and terrifying the remains of the ancient horror of the depths looked, and it wasn't even because of the fact that it had been killed. What disturbed him the most was the manner of Old Tom's death. Sunny was not entirely sure that he could have killed the immense creature. What he was sure about, however, was that he would not have been able to finish it off in one blow. But it had been. Old Tom had been crushed like an annoying pest. Knowing that there was something out there capable of doing something like that made him feel uneasy. That creature, whatever it was ahead of them in the race toward the Eternal City, so they would inevitably clash with it, in the end. Sunny could not help but wonder if he could withstand a similar blow. The answer he came up with was not very reassuring. The night garden continued its descent. It plummeted into the dark depths, and then deeper, deeper, and deeper still. The water had long started to behave strangely, and so did the world itself. At times, it felt like the very space was starting to bend and crack, crushed by the terrible pressure exerted by the vast expanse of the storm sea. But mostly, everything around the living ship seemed terribly still. Sunny was not sure that even his supreme body would survive at this abyssal depth anymore. They did not encounter any nightmare creatures after sailing past the grotesque, enormous corpse of the old time, dead or alive. Perhaps even among the abominable horrors of the depths, very few dwelled in these unfathomable depths. Perhaps there was simply something special about the area where the Eternal City had drowned, repelling the abominations. In any case, the descent of the night garden was eerily quiet. At some point, Sunny and Jet found themselves talking simply to hear the sound of human voices. He shared his knowledge of obscure facts about the dream realm, while she told stories and anecdotes about her days of serving as a government enforcer. Eventually, however, even their voices failed to keep the suffocating silence at bay. Hours passed, slowly flowing into days. It seemed impossible that any body of water could be this deep, and yet the night garden continued to descend at great speed with no sign of the seabed in sight. The soldiers and the civilians were safely hidden below deck, so the only ones who had to face the absolute silence of the black abyss were Sunny, Jet, and the Saints of Night. If not for the rustle of leaves and the glow of the lanterns illuminating the night garden, they would have probably long begun to struggle mentally because of the unnatural lack of anything out there around them, in the darkness. It was easy to imagine people going mad from the mere, eerie absence of everything. Thankfully, they were too busy to lose their minds. Despite the draining monotony of the endless descent, Sunny and his companions had a lot to do. There were countless checks to be performed to ascertain the condition of the ship, as well as other measures to ensure that everything was going according to plan. Taught by the bitter experience of his previous 2 expeditions, Sunny was regularly testing the connection between himself and his other incarnations. He also kept sending mental messages to Cassie at set intervals, to make sure that nothing interfered with their link. As the night garden descended into the unfathomable depths, Cassie's voice slowly began to sound distant in his mind. However, it never disappeared altogether. One of the most complicated tasks they had to perform was to make sure that Nephice could still open her dream gate near the night garden despite the great mass of water separating her from it. Everything seemed to be fine in that regard, too, even if coordinating the tests was growing progressively more difficult because Nephice herself was in the middle of a dangerous expedition. The most persistent threat to Sunny so far was boredom. Leaning on one of the arches of the runic hall, he exhaled slowly and asked in a thoughtful tone, "What do you think will happen if Nephice opens a dream gate between the storm sea and somewhere like the nightmare desert, then pulls water in?" Ether was controlling the living ship at the moment, while Jet was sitting on the floor and leaning her back against a pillar. She gave him an amused look. "Wow, that's a great idea. Actually, that can be used as a weapon of mass destruction. Well, mass irrigation, at least." She fell silent for a few moments, then shrugged. I guess she would quickly run out of essence despite being supreme, considering the great volume of water that would be passing through her gate. A new sea might still appear in the area she decides to flood, though. Sunny whistled, already imagining where he would put a new sea. Jet, meanwhile, sighed. It has little practical use, however, because it would all be seawater. Otherwise, we might have been able to boost agriculture in several desolate regions of the dream realm by now. Ether, who had been silent until then, suddenly spoke, or she could pour it into a volcano. Both Jet and Sunny looked at him in surprise. What? Why? Ether coughed in embarrassment. Oh, it's just, the explosion would be quite spectacular. I read that was how the Minoan civilization had disappeared. Sunny blinked a few times. He did not know what the Minoan civilization was, and why its supreme had decided to pour a sea into a volcano. But more importantly, you really think that Nephice needs new ways of producing spectacular explosions? Ether blushed. Ah. I did not think about that. He wanted to say something else, but at that moment, Sunny's expression changed. Stop the ship. Slow it down, quickly. Jet tensed, while Ether looked at him in surprise. Then, the runic circle shimmered slightly, and the rate of the night garden's descent slowly started to decline. Torrents of water were expelled from the reservoir, and for a few brief moments, the living ship was surrounded by small, fleeting flashes of light. Those were bubbles of air bursting from the obliterating pressure. Jet jumped to her feet. Did you sense something? Sunny remained silent for a while, then nodded. Yes. I sense the bottom of the sea. Indeed, his shadow sense had perceived something solid far below the night garden, a vast, never-ending plain of solid ground. In fact, it seemed that the storm sea did have a bottom, after all. And they were about to reach it. Soon enough, the night garden came to a stop, hovering just a few hundred meters above the ground. Neve and Bloodwave had joined them at the bridge by then, and all of them stared down with stunned expressions. Eventually, it was Neve who spoke first. It's flat. Sunny nodded slowly, confirming that it indeed was. Below them, a perfectly flat surface stretched in all directions, with nothing at all rising above it even by a centimeter. There was no seaweed or coral, no dirt, no anything. Just an endless expanse of flawlessly smooth, glistening glass. Or at least of something that looked like glass. It was as if they were somehow pulled into a video game where a level failed to render, or maybe had fallen through the map. The bottom of the storm sea looked like a placeholder excuse of proper geometry, a glaring error in the usual messiness of the natural world. Sunny looked closer and realized that the floor of the vast sea was not actually black. Instead, it was simply perfectly transparent, but this odd glass-like material stretched so far down that there was nothing beneath it except the lack of light. What is this? His voice was full of bewilderment. After a long stretch of silence, Ether answered in a calm tone, It's water. They all looked at him, failing to understand what he meant. Ether hesitated for a moment, then explained, under extreme pressure, water changes from a liquid to a solid state, and the solid state of water is ice. Only it can't become ordinary ice here, since it can't expand to form its molecular structure due to the pressure. So, it can only become a solid with a denser crystal lattice, a kind of crystal comparable to diamond in hardness. That is what we're looking at. He smiled faintly. So the storm sea doesn't really have a bottom. It's just that its waters turned solid under their own weight here. Sunny stared at Ether for a few moments, then looked back at the flawlessly flat plane of glass-like surface below them. Eventually, he shook his head. That's creepy. I can't help but feel like something is going to stare at us from below this endlessly vast, infinitely thick, perfectly transparent crystal seal. At that moment, Jet's hand firmly blocked his mouth. Looking at him with desperation, she whispered loudly, "Sunny. Please stop saying these things aloud." Fresh chapters posted on novelfire.net. He stared at her for a moment, then nodded slowly. When Jet removed his hand, he smiled. Why? If the abyss gazes at us for too long, I might just gaze back. Then, Sunny shrugged. Don't worry, though. I am completely sure that there's nothing there. Instead of answering, Jet simply groaned. The night garden glided above the vast expanse of dark glass, pushing through the cold crushing abyss of unfathomable depths. The light of its lanterns glistened in the smooth black surface, and a faint reflection of the living ship traveled below it as if the night garden was being pursued by its ghost. After the first hour or so, the novelty of the flawlessly flat plane of smooth glass had grown old. From time to time, eerie shapes appeared from the darkness and slowly drifted past the living ship. Those were the remains of beings and things that had sunk to the bottom of the storm sea throughout the eons, and were too durable to be destroyed even by its impossible pressure. There were gargantuan bones, broken frames of ancient ships, and unrecognizable ruins. At some point, the hands of a gargantuan statue revealed themselves from the lightless void, outstretched toward the distant surface. They were followed by an immense face, its features long erased by the passage of time, and the broken lines of a shattered crown. Sunny and his companions observed the Titanic statue in silence. Eventually, he sighed and shook his head. What was it with the people of the dream realm and enormous statues? It's almost impossible to go anywhere here without stumbling on at least one or two, or seven. Neve, who had returned to the bridge, shrugged. Maybe it's because many of those people were giants themselves. Jet, who had been resting by a pillar, opened her eyes and gave them a quiet look. It is simply because they could. They could afford to spend time and resources on creating majestic statues, so they did. They did not need a reason other than that because they had not been born in a dying world being consumed by an apocalyptic war, like we were. Her calm words ushered in a somber silence, and soon, the gargantuan statue disappeared into the darkness behind them. The night garden moved aimlessly, searching for the eternal city. Sunny had cast his shadow sense as far as he could, trying to find its ruins. Jet and the Saints of Night, meanwhile, were preparing for battle. Where are you? Sunny hated to admit it, but the long period of tense anticipation was starting to negatively affect his mental state. Entire days spent in a state of battle readiness, surrounded by utter darkness and suffocating silence, had tired him. The fact that nothing had happened was only making him more frustrated. And if he felt that way, then Jet and the Saints of Night were probably worse off. Well, maybe not Jet. After all, she had always seemed relaxed and comfortable in any environment, no matter the circumstances. Now, too, it looked like she was taking a nap without a care in the world. One of her eyes opened as soon as Sunny suddenly rose to his feet, though. Looking ahead, he remained silent for a moment and then smiled darkly. Found it. Out there, countless kilometers away, he felt a vast mass of shadows being cast on the bottom of the storm sea. His perception of them was muddied and unclear, but he perceived at least several towering structures resting on the black glass. Sunny looked at his companions. We found the Eternal City. The Eternal City had let itself be known long before they could see it. At first, Sunny thought that his eyes were playing a trick on him, but then he had to admit that what he saw was true out there, far away in front of them. The absolute darkness of the abyssal depths was chased away by pale light. The distant radiance illuminated the great mass of water, resembling the auroras he had seen in Antarctica. That was the great lighthouse of the Eternal City shining from the bottom of a boundless sea, still intact even thousands of years after the demon of repose, its supposed creator, had perished. That radiance had served as a beacon for those traveling through the cold darkness of the black skies. Now, it was a guiding light for those traversing the crushing black abyss of the lightless depths. "It's a bit crazy, isn't it?" Jet gave him a brief look. "What is?" Sunny shook his head in bewilderment. "That place, the Eternal City, it survived the wrath of Storm God, fell from space, crashed into the ocean, and spent thousands of years enduring the crushing pressure on the bottom of the sea. And yet, it still seems to be intact." He let out a chuckle. "The most update N0 vels are published on n0velfire.net. That's one hell of a building standard." She smiled, then sent the night garden forward. Gradually, the distant radiance drew closer. The living ship moved toward its source, slowly coming into view of the drowned city. Soon enough, Sunny saw the vast ruin laying on the endless smooth expanse of black glass, illuminated by the light of its silver spires. Only he wasn't sure that the Eternal City could be called a ruin. It seemed to be completely intact and in pristine condition, after all. Beautiful silver spires rose above the endless expanse of black glass, emanating radiant light. Smaller buildings made from stone stood between them, with streets, squares, and vast parks. The Eternal City seemed to be protected by an aegis of its own, similar to the night guardina. Gargantuan dome surrounded it, preventing the water from drowning the streets. The entire city seemed to be separated into dozens of large islands, with roaring rivers flowing between them at great speed. At the heart of it, a magnificent palace or maybe a temple towered above the landscape. The Eternal City was vast, easily competing in size with Bastion, Ravenheart, and NQSC, so Sunny could not discern the details of the palace. And that was not what he was paying attention to, anyway. "Crazy, it's absolutely crazy." His expression turned somber. Because out there, on the streets of the Eternal City, he sensed something else. Countless shadows were moving, their shadows that belonged to living beings. It seemed that just like the buildings, the immortal citizens of the fallen city had been restored to pristine condition, as well. Jet's icy blue eyes turned even colder as she regarded the distant forest of silver spires. She inhaled deeply, and then said in a dark tone, "I smell nightmare creatures." Sunny looked at her silently. His shadow sense could not reach deep into the dome surrounding the Eternal City, but he could still perceive some things. After lingering for a few moments, he smiled. "Well, I have a bit of news. There's bad news, and worse news. Which do you want to hear first?" She looked at him with no amusement in her eyes. "Ah. I'll have the bad news first, please." Sunny nodded. "The city is full of powerful beings. There are hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of them crawling all over its streets." The Saints of Night looked at each other with unease. Jet, however, remained unperturbed. "What's the worst news, then?" Sunny sighed and looked at the silver lights of the distant city. Was he imagining it, or were they painted ghostly green in a particular area? He grimaced. "It seems like the Dutchman has already made landfall. I think some of those countless living beings are currently engaged in a battle against its wraiths, out there on the outskirts of the city." It was nice to imagine that the civilization of the Eternal City had survived, and was currently repelling the invasion of horrid specters. However, Sunny had little hope of finding a city full of ancient, enlightened immortals. Things never went that way in the dream realm, after all, and Nightwalker had described the Eternal City as nightmarish on top of that. So, it was most likely a situation where one horde of abominable horrors was fighting a different, even more horrifying one. They were going to find out the truth soon enough. There was another anomalous zone on the other side of the city, too. That one, however, was Ferrant. If the battle between the Wraith fleet and the denizens of the Eternal City was expressed through a cacophony of motion, even if ghosts did not cast shadows, the beings fighting them did. That area stood out because of the total lack of movement. Follow current novels on novelire.net as if every living being there had already been obliterated. Sunny could only sense the very outer reaches of the Eternal City, so he could not say more. However, that alone was enough to make a few conclusions. The Dutchman had arrived earlier than they, and its forces had already established a foothold within the dome. Currently, they controlled one of the outer islands and were staging a fierce attack to push deeper into the city. Jet frowned. So, what do you suggest we do? Join the fray? Sunny hesitated for a few moments, then shook his head. Facing the Dutchman is already bad enough, but facing it and a legion of unknown nightmare creatures at the same time is even worse. And why should we? This is a large city. We can just as easily land on the other side of it and see who can conquer it faster. Then, we will have far more information and a chance to earn a territorial advantage before clashing with the Dutchman's forces. Ideally, the Wraith Legion would have been wiped out by then, and they would only have to deal with the other eerie horde of horrifying abominations. That, and the unknown being that Sunny suspected of being somewhere out there, inside the dome. The third contender, whatever that thing, was Old Tom's killer, unless it was the captain of the Dutchman who had finished the malevolent oyster off. Sunny looked at the vast expanse of the night garden, then added, "Plus, our primary goal right now is to find the wharf that can repair the night garden. It should be somewhere on the outer rim of the Eternal City, so let's sail around it and see. We can make further plans after securing a safe stronghold for our ship." Suppressing a feeling of urgency, they slowly sent the night garden circling the Eternal City from a distance. As the living ship moved through the abyssal depths, Sunny managed to explore the fallen city a bit better. It was strange, his shadow sense could easily pass through the aegis of the night garden, and it seemed to be able to penetrate the dome of the Eternal City as well. But not too far beyond the invisible barrier, his senses betrayed him, as if something else was stopping them. Those things inside the city. What do they look like? Sunny turned his head, remained silent for a few moments, and then answered Jet with a hint of uncertainty, "I can't actually see them. I can only sense their shadows." And their shadows, well, outwardly, they seem like human shadows. They had 2 legs, 2 arms, and 1 head, at least. However, there was something profoundly disturbing about the shadows of the immortal denizens of the Eternal City. Sunny could not describe what exactly alarmed him, but he sensed a subtle, unnerving wrongness about them. "I think I see the wharf." Eventually, Neve's voice distracted him from his unease. Looking forward, Sunny saw a massive structure protruding from the dome of the Eternal City. Before it, however, a mass of steel was forcefully thrust into the black glass just outside the invisible barrier, with a net of jagged cracks marring the smooth surface around it. Sunny did not know what strength one had to possess to actually shatter the bottom of the storm sea, but the sigh of it made him shiver. "What is this?" As the night garden drew closer and its light fell onto the surface of the towering steel, he could vaguely discern runes carved into its surface. They were written on the outward side of the steel, facing the boundless expanse of the storm sea. The script was strange, but he could still somewhat translate it. Sunny exhaled slowly as he read the words written on the stone steel. As he did, his eyes quaked slightly. The runes read, "I am Dayron, the Serpent King, heed my warning, wanderer, come back. There is no salvation from eternity and no respite from its bond. Beyond this line lies hell." Jet and the Saints of Night studied the runes, their expressions turning somber. The spell must have provided them with a better translation than Sunny's own, but he was reasonably confident in his interpretation. "Hell, huh?" Bloodwave's voice did not sound enthused. Sunny smiled. "Well, you know how it goes for us awakened. We always get sent into the depths of hell only to find another, even more dreadful hell at the bottom of that one. I've been to a place or two that are way worse than the worst depiction of hell humans could come up with. You must have, too." Bloodwave grunted in solidarity. "Still, sounds quite ominous." Sunny had no retort to that. He remained silent for a bit, then sighed. NW novel chapters are published on novelfire.net, so Dayron visited the Eternal City as well. Neve was looking at the towering steel with an expression that betrayed a hint of reverence. Hearing Sunny speak of Dayron, he tuned to him. The Serpent King was the lone supreme of the Stormsea civilization before it was consumed by the Dream Realm. We knew very little about him until recently. Actually, it was the exploration report on the tomb of Ariel that shone a light on his eventual end. Maybe you've heard about it? Sunny glanced at him and smiled. Yeah. I've heard a thing or two. Neve nodded. But even if we knew very little, we did discover traces of him all across the Stormsea. Most of the citadels the House of Night used to inhabit are ruins of Darren's fallen kingdom, after all, even if most of it had been swallowed by the depths. He is a mythical figure. Neve paused for a moment and added in a quiet tone, so, it feels strange to stand where he once stood, looking at the runes he personally carved into stone. Sunny remained silent for a while. He felt strange, as well, but for a different reason. To him, finding a message left by Dayron of the Twilight Sea felt like meeting an old friend. Do you think he came to the Eternal City once to claim the lineage of Storm God? Neve hesitated. I am not sure. If he did, it did not help him and his people, in the end. Sunny sighed. He studied the Great Steel some more, then said suddenly, I met Dayron once, Neve, Bloodwave, and Ether turned to him in shock. Jet raised an eyebrow, too. Sunny smiled. He was a tough bastard. One of the toughest Sunny had ever met, in fact. His soul still quaked in the throes of phantom pain at the memory of the Serpent King's sharp fangs. Sunny had met the nightmare version of Dayron of the Twilight Sea and killed him. Then, he received a blossom from Windflower, Darren's daughter, her farewell gift. If Dayron felt it necessary to leave a warning here, this place must be really bad. Which meant that Sunny needed to change his plans a little. As the Saints of Night stared at him silently, he turned to Jet. The wharf is empty, so it is safe to dock the night garden there. I will scout ahead. With that, he stepped into the shadows and vanished from the runic hall. A second later, ignoring Darren's warning, Sunny appeared inside the dome protecting the Eternal City. He respected the Serpent King a great deal, but knew that the hint of awe Darren's name invoked in him was a vestige of the past. In the past, Sunny had been a mere master, while Dayron had been a supreme. He had been an obstacle of such imposing height that even the thought of overcoming it seemed impossible. Even if Sunny did kill him, in the end, it was only because Dayron had been a pale shadow of his former self, and half dead from battling other ancient horrors on top of that. But that was the past. Now, Sunny was a sovereign himself. In fact, he accomplished more than Dayron had managed, he made it further. He and his cohort conquered the Great River, at least, and while Dayron had seen no hope for his realm except to lead his people into the tomb of Ariel as one last desperate gamble, Sunny and Nephice were steadily preparing to face the looming calamities on the battlefield. They had a good chance of making it to the very end, as well. They were stronger. And their people, the children of war, were stronger than the children of storm had been, as well. So, Dayron had not necessarily known better than Sunny, and his advice was not necessarily implacable. Maybe he was right, though? As soon as Sunny appeared within the dome of the Eternal City, he was overwhelmed by an ominous feeling as well as a far more mundane feeling of discomfort caused by the fact that the air here was thin and cold, making him feel like he was suffocating. Grimacing, Sunny glanced around. Something is telling me that dying in the Eternal City is a very, very bad idea. There had to be a reason why Dayron had warned those trying to enter the drowned city to fear eternity. The wharf worthy of accepting the night garden was similarly titanic, spanning more than a dozen kilometers in length and half as much in width, with walls that were as tall as mountains, literally. At first glance, Sunny judged that they were at least 3 kilometers high, partially submerged in water. The water surprised him, actually. He would have thought that the dome would prevent it from flowing into the Eternal City entirely, but strangely enough, while the invisible barrier prevented the unfathomable mass of the sea from plummeting at the city from above, some of it did cover the black glass. The water seethed and swirled, flowing as it glistened in the silver light of the magnificent spires. The main structure of the wharf surrounded a horseshoe-shaped berth, with huge gates facing the vast expanse of the storm sea. The gates were currently open, and the berth was partially filled with water. The walls of the wharf were built from stone, but inside, it was constructed out of wood. Everything around him was spotless and in pristine condition, with not a sign of wear in sight. In fact, that was one of the reasons why Sunny felt so unnerved. He had not realized it before, but the world was supposed to show signs of the ruthless passage of time and display subtle imperfections. Even in the most well-maintained places, there were small flaws, scuffs, scratches, faded colors. But everything in the Eternal City seemed brand new and absolutely spotless. That alone was enough to make his skin crawl, as if the world around him was not real. The dissonance was eerie. Not paying attention to the bridge connecting the wharf to the city just yet, Sunny concentrated on the interior of the gigantic structure itself. Just as he had perceived before, it was entirely empty, with no movement and no living shadows anywhere in sight or hidden from view. That's good, I guess. As Sunny turned to face the brilliant lights of the Eternal City, the bow of the night garden pierced the veil of the invisible barrier behind him. After thousands of years, the living ship returned to the place where it had been born. As the night garden passed through the invisible barrier, it continued to glide across the turbulent waters that covered the infinite expanse of black glass. Great waves rose as its immense mass displaced myriad tons of water, crashing into the towering walls of the wharf and escaping into the wide canals of the Eternal City. Standing at the edge of the Titanic structure's open gate, Sunny observed the wrath of the elements in silence. The living ship slowly drew closer. As it did, the wharf, which had seemed improbably enormous before, suddenly did not feel so big anymore. Sunny saw the branches of the trees that grew on the surface decks of the night garden sway as it passed him, slowly entering the awaiting berth. He could not help but feel amazed at the precision with which Jet had steered the wide breadth of the Titanic ship into the gate of the great wharf. There was barely a few dozen meters between the tall sides of the night garden and the walls of the berth, and that gap seemed minuscule in comparison to its gargantuan size. The ship continued to sail past him for a long while as it entered the wharf, seemingly endless. Eventually, however, Sunny saw the stern of the night garden, which meant that countless kilometers away, its bow had reached the end of the horseshoe-shaped berth, resting against its barrier. Finally, the living ship came to a halt, swaying gently on the tumultuous currents of water. What now? They had intended to find a way to repair the night garden here, but the great citadel did not exactly come with an instruction manual, let alone the wharf where the Demon of Repose had built her ship once, thousands of years ago. Sunny did not have to worry, though. Soon after the night garden came to a rest inside the colossal berth, the wharf came alive. The rest might have just felt a strange, almost palpable energy permeate the air, but Sunny could sense far more. In his eyes, which could peer into the nature of things, the Titanic structure lit up like a radiant star. That was because an impossible amount of soul essence was flowing through it, the raging currents infusing every centimeter of the stone walls and the wooden scaffolds with a daunting, exuberant vitality. Various areas of the wharf slowly awakened from their long slumber, igniting with shimmering light. While Sunny sensed the ground beneath him tremble. Then, the vast vertical plane of the huge gate he was standing on began to move with a powerful shiver. At the same time, the other side of the gate moved, as well. Seemingly slowly because of its prodigious size, but breathtakingly rapid in reality, the gates of the wharf closed. Sunny, who had unwittingly caught a ride on one of its wings, barely managed to keep his balance when the two sides shut with a deafening thunderclap, cutting out the night garden's path of retreat. Of course, if there was a need to make an escape, the Titanic ship could simply ram the gates with the indestructible immensity of its stern, causing mayhem and devastation on an unimaginable scale. But Sunny hoped that it would not come to that. Nothing happened for a minute or two outwardly, at least. Then, Sunny heard the roaring rustle of flowing water echoing between the sides of the living ship and the walls of its berth. That was the turbulent water inside the wharf draining away through invisible channels. Its level slowly dropped, and the night garden lowered with it. Sunny had expected some mechanism to catch and secure it in place. And there was indeed a mechanism, of sorts. As he watched in wonder, the wooden interior of the colossal wharf blossomed with myriad flowers and leaves. Then, enormous branches stretched outward, gently catching the night garden and fusing with its hull. Soon enough, the water was entirely gone, revealing the floor of the berth. The night garden was resting on it, supported by the colossal branches that prevented it from tilting to the side, like a tree that returned to the forest. The branches, however, were not there simply for support. As Sunny watched, his eyes widening a little, the powerful currents of soul essence he had observed before flowed through them into the living ship, nourishing it. There seemed to be some kind of sorcery at work, guiding them in fleeting patterns and dictating what effect they had on the weathered expanse of the night garden. The wharf was not merely replenishing its reserves of essence. Under its nurturing influence, the scars marring the hull of the living ship began to close, and countless damaged parts hidden in its cavernous interior began to be mended. Although Sunny could not perceive it, he was sure that the process of restoration and rejuvenation was happening to the mystical part of the night garden, to the very sorcery that made it function. So, in the end, he and his companions did not have to learn how to operate the wharf of the Eternal City, or what to do to repair the living ship. Just like the night garden, the wharf itself was a living thing, and so, it could mend the Titanic vessel all by itself. The process would probably take quite a while to complete, but it was having an effect already. Sunny let out a relieved sigh. That's one thing I don't need to worry about anymore. In fact, the restoration of the night garden alone was enough to make this expedition worth it. It was one of the few great citadels of humanity, after all, and one that offered the human domain a unique and vital advantage, not to mention serving as home for millions of people. But, of course, Sunny was not going to be satisfied with just that. As the process of restoration began, his gaze left the vast expanse of the night garden and traveled to the far side of the wharf, where a bridge connecting it to the rest of the Eternal City was hidden. Somewhere out there, the Dutchman was already leading its army of wraiths to conquer the sunken city. The mysterious third contender was on the move, as well. The lineage of Storm God waited to be claimed. The fragment of Weaver's forbidden lineage did, as well. ssnovelfire.net and myriad treasures of the immortal abode on top of that. Exhaling slowly, Sunny closed his eyes for a moment and smiled. Let's conquer hell, then. He paused for a few seconds, then added in a less solemn tone, one more hell, I mean.